Our next speaker is Dr. Jill McCluskey. She will be presenting via web conference due to not being able to get out of the Washington airport yesterday. Her talk is going to be on innovations for supporting contracting and supply chains. She is the Regents Professor and Distinguished Professor of Sustainability in the School of Economic Sciences at the Washington State University. She is the incoming director of the SES and served as Associate Director for the last 4 years. Dr. McCluskey's research focuses on product quality and reputation, sustainable labeling, consumer preferences for new technology, and representation of women in STEM. Dr. McCluskey?
Hello, I'm happy to be here. I want to make sure I can share my screen with my PowerPoint. Is it working?
Jill, do you see the share screen button? We're not seeing your slides.
Yeah, I'm clicking on the share screen.
It's okay.
And it worked before.
Yeah, no, let's speed this out. Okay.
Okay, let me.
There you go. Looks like perfect. Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. All right. So I'm happy to be here, and I found it really interesting. I'm happy that it was great to listen to Christian Peters' presentation, because I think mine will fit into that. I'm looking at supporting innovations for supporting contracting and supply chains, and I will look at it a little bit differently than you might think. So traditionally, people think about supply chains as starting with the production of primary commodities and ending with the final product. And that includes processing, delivery, sales, and important issues are identity preservation and traceability and marketing. But I want to go back even farther and even earlier in the supply chain and think about how universities and plant breeders can fit into the supply chain. And in this presentation, I'll use the example of Cosmic Crisp apples, which were developed at Washington State University. So as the previous presentation discussed, we have decreasing government support for U.S. public ag research and development. And so there's needs for alternative arrangements in order to sustain these programs. Well, one way is the Bayh-Dole Act gave universities the right to patent the intellectual property rights from university-conducted research. And so it's provided universities with additional revenues. And given the political and funding constraints surrounding development of perennial crop varieties, a question that we were asking is, what is the optimal way to commercialize innovations that are made by land-grant universities? So I want to just emphasize, starting out, that public research is really important. It's essential to develop and market new crop varieties for the long-term profitability of farmers. And traditional varieties need to be improved to meet new consumer expectations for quality. As they increase, we need to have more customized and more differentiated products. So here's, in this slide, I have another example of a WSU new crop variety that was developed. It's in raspberries, the Cascade Premier. So let's say you have a great innovation and you recognize that. So now what? What do you do? We have the university plant breeders might have developed this great new variety that has the potential to be marketed with premium prices. But after it's developed, it has to be commercialized. And so we're interested in how should universities commercialize new plant varieties. And we know that given the mission of the land-grant university, they are not like the typical innovator. They want to maximize their own profits, and they also want to maximize their licensees' profits. And the issue is that licensees might be university stakeholders for these land-grant universities who support researchers. And so we need to think about different licensing schemes that can have different impacts on producers and the plant breeding programs. So given the example of Washington State University, in the 1990s, the apple industry grew mostly Red Delicious apples, and that was a problem because quality had suffered and they received very low prices in the market. And so WSU wanted to breed new apple varieties, and the Washington apple industry began to fund an apple breeding program at WSU in 1994. Growers in the state of Washington are required to pay assessments to the Washington Tree Fruit Research Consortium. And in 2013, the Washington State growers finalized a promise of $32 million, the largest gift in WSU history, with the goal of making WSU one of the top 3 free tree fruit research institutions in the world. And they're intended to support new research and extension positions. So from this, only 3 years after it was established, they came up with a game-changing innovation. And so Bruce Barrett made the cross that led to WA38 in 1997. And it takes 22 years to, because of how long it takes for trees to mature and produce fruit. It takes a long time, and so 22 years is pretty quick to actually have a new product. I don't know if any of you have tried the Cosmic Crisp, but it's an excellent eating experience. And it's able to store well also. The interesting thing is that only Washington growers will be able to grow Cosmic Crisp, and it is being commercialized by a private firm called Proprietary Variety Management, PVM. And so it's sort of interesting. I'll just digress just a little bit. It's interesting, the name Cosmic Crisp, and I remember talking about this with Brad Rickard, that they had focus groups that were in Pullman, Yakima, and Seattle, and they looked at just looking at the apple, you can see that it's sort of a wine color, a red wine color with lenticels on the apple surface, and people thought the lenticels looked like starbursts, and so they came up with the name Cosmic. And then they also, the other part is the crisp texture, and it crisp in the name Cosmic Crisp leads it to Honey Crisp. So I was pretty critical myself of this name. The focus group population didn't really match the expected market population. It's expected to be an international market population. We have this college town Pullman, we have Yakima where they grow apples, and we have Seattle. So I was a little bit critical of that. It also sounds like a kids breakfast cereal company, and in fact they had to buy the name from a defunct breakfast cereal. And the last part, consumers want natural products, and Cosmic Crisp sounds like it was created in a lab, when in fact it was created with traditional plant breeding. There have been a large number of trees planted and only in Washington. So they began producing apple saplings as fast as possible. The plan was to start with 300,000 trees. Growers requested 4 million, and so they had a lottery in order to give the first available trees. Within 3 years, 13 million trees have been planted. And we're expected to have the first crop this year in 2019. You might be able to buy some, but it's expected less than 200,000 this year, but then 1.7 million in 2020, 5.5 million in 2021, and 10.5 million in 2022. So I'm concerned that there's going to be a glut on the market. So let's just think for a minute about what happened, about this example. This is an demand enhancing innovation. And so what that means is that it actually makes the demand curve shift so that people are willing to pay more for it. Traditionally, a lot of agricultural research has been cost reducing. And so on the left side, I have an example of demand enhancing where demand shifts. On the right side of my slide, I have a cost reducing. And in this one, I have a drastic reduction so that the firm who has this greatly cost reducing innovation can actually be a monopolist because the monopoly price is lower than the previous price. So there's been a lot of research on contracting and licensing. Most of the research on licensing were for cost-reducing innovations. As I've been saying, the new tree varieties are typically demand-enhancing rather than cost-reducing. There was a paper in 2010 that analyzed an innovator profits and licensing with a demand-enhancing innovation under different contracts, and they found that with a single innovator and 2 licensees, the innovator maximizes profits by means of a 2-part tariff to licenses, or based on fixed fees and a per unit royalty. Then Brad Rickard and his colleagues generalized this paper to N licensees, so you can have a large number of licensees, which better fits the apple industry or most fruit industries. And now the research that I'm talking about with this paper, which includes Brad, is where the innovator wants to maximize both its profits and the licensee's profits. So I'll just talk briefly about the economic model. I know it's not only just my audience is not only economists, but we develop a theoretical model where we want to optimize the optimization problem that the university faces. It cares about its own profits and the licensee's profits. And the licensee decides on whether to pay for the license and use the innovation that enhances demand. And then if they do, then what quantity of output to produce either with the old technology or the new technology. And given their participation in output decisions, then the innovator chooses the mechanism and to maximize the weighted sum of its profits and the licensee's profits. And we consider a large range of weights, how much the innovator cares about his stakeholders. So what it'll be is a university owns a patent for a new variety, and the downstream firms are the producers. Each one chooses a homogeneous product, but if they're using the new product, it will be a higher quality product. But within the either old technology or new technology, the quality is the same within that group. Then the actual producers choose output as Cornell oligopolists. So this is just they're competing with their quantities, and they have to decide whether to get a license or not. The innovation is vertical, and that just means that it's quality, that everyone agrees that it's better. And then finally, we assume that all firms have the same costs that are normalized. We also have a utility function that's based on Musa-Rosen utility, and all that means is it includes this. We're including a parameter for quality. So from this, we see that the consumers value quality. It's labeled as S here. Consumers value quality, and then we can derive demand that is based on quality, and consumers are willing to pay more for quality. So with this game, in the first stage, the innovator decides to license his innovation to either a single firm or multiple firms, and it makes a take it or leave it offer. The licensing contract can either be a fixed fee, a per box royalty, or a 2-part tariff. And all that is, a 2-part tariff is just another way of saying it's a combination. So it has both the fixed fee for trees or boxes, and then a per box, or a fixed fee for trees, and then a per box royalty for a percentage. It's like a tax percentage that they pay on each box. In the second stage, the firms decide whether to accept the offer and how much to produce, and then the third stage, the firms that did not accept the contract decide how much to produce. And we can solve this with backwards induction, so we just solve from the end. So from this theory and our empirical analysis, it indicates that the licensing mechanism that maximizes the joint profits of both the university and the growers depend on the number of growers and the innovation level. And so when there are few licensees, then the joint profits of the innovator and the licensees are generally the greatest under exclusive per unit royalty followed by the 2-part tariff. But that doesn't really fit agriculture, to have a small number an exclusive license. So the exclusive means that only one farmer would grow the tree, and that doesn't fit agriculture. So when the number of firms is large, as we have a large number of apple producers, we find that the joint profits are larger under the non-exclusive, so everyone in Washington can grow, and either a two-part tariff when the innovation is high or a per unit royalty when the innovation is low. So if it's a big innovation, I would argue the Cosmic Crisp is a big innovation. The quality is so much better than the optimal contract would be a fixed fee plus a per unit royalty. So we did numerical simulations of this model to try different weights based on how much the university cares about the growers, and we find that when innovation is high, as we vary the weights, the two-part tariff produces the greatest joint profits for the innovator and the licensees. So then we also did an experiment with actual Washington apple growers. So we went to the Washington State Horticultural Association annual meetings in 2014, and we recruited apple growers to participate in our experiment. We gave them each $20 as a participation fee, and we told them about 6 different licensing options, both exclusive and non-exclusive. So all the different permutations of the possible ways of licensing. They were asked to submit bids for each licensing scheme, and after they were placed, we randomly selected one of the bids as binding. If their bid was greater than or equal to the market clearing price, which was randomly selected, then they were required to purchase the right to grow the variety. Otherwise, the experiment was done without any purchase. And after that, we also did a survey, and we found we had with our growers, they had an average of 23 years of experience in apple production, and collectively they had 16% of all apple acreage in the state of Washington. And so we presented them with some assumptions, and these are based on actual assumptions that Karina Gallardo came up with through her tree fruit extension program. A license to patent gave growers access to 1 acre of trees, and that would be used to produce this new demand-enhancing variety. And we explained to them that 1,400 trees would be on 1 acre, which is typical of the tree density that you would get for the modern tree fruit wall architecture that they use. And we also told them that the cost for new varieties would be similar to Honeycrisp, and that the net yield would be 70 bins per acre. And we had the price for the new apple was set at $54 per given to the producer. So with those information costs, expected yields, and market prices, they fully understood what profits they could expect to achieve from growing the new variety under the given licensing scheme. And so we calculated hypothetical profits for them, and for who was eligible to grow the new variety based on what they submitted, and if their bid was higher than the randomly drawn price. And depending on their profit calculation, they could gain or lose money from their $20 participation fee. So if their hypothetical profits were greater than $20,000 per acre, they got an additional $10. So for $30, if their profits were less than 15, then they had to pay out $10. So they only got a net payment of $10. And so at the completion of the experiment, they had between $10 and $30. And then they filled out a survey. And so we calculated their willingness to pay for the different schemes that for an acre. And the fixed fee scheme is straightforward. It's just the fixed fee that they're willing to pay. And we also calculated, so it would be consistent. The per unit scheme would be based on summing the net present value over 20 years of how much they would pay, which was the assumed life of an apple tree. And we used a 5% interest rate. So we regressed the willingness to pay for each type, and wanted to see what affected people's willingness to pay for the different contracts, the actual growers. We found that that if the growers currently grew, for some of these, if they currently grew Gala apples, they were it had a negative and significant impact on willingness to adopt the new apple. If they grew Honeycrisp, we see it was negative for the fixed fee, but it was not statistically significant for the other categories. All growers were willing to pay significantly more for an exclusive contract. And then we see in the bottom row, we see that the constant term for the different contracts. We see that the growers were willing to pay the most for the 2-part tariff, which is what we predicted which is what we predicted both theoretically and with the numerical simulations of the theory. So that was confirmed our theory with what the growers were willing to pay. So for just the conclusion from this study is we understand that there are political and institutional limitations for licensing contracts when innovations are released by a public university, and especially considering that plant breeding programs in public universities have a stated goal of creating new varieties that are available to all growers in the state. So, for example, we couldn't give one super grower or one packing house the right to a club variety. It would have to go to all growers in the state. And our findings then suggest that the joint profits of the innovator and the licensee are greatest for the large industry, where there are a large number of firms under the non-exclusive contract, and a 2-part tariff if the innovation is high, or a per unit royalty if the innovation is low. So this brings us back to Cosmic Crisp. How does this compare to the handling of the commercialization of Cosmic Crisp? Well, what they actually have in the contract
Jill,
is
you have a few more seconds.
Okay, this is my last slide. A fee for trees and a per box royalty, so it is a 2-part tariff. And so the commercialization that they used was the best licensing scheme to maximize both. And I argue that Cosmic Crisp is a large innovation. However, it can be sold by all Washington growers, so non-exclusive within Washington. So the Washington growers should benefit relative to other growers in the U.S. or internationally. The concern is there's no control of quantity, so there could be a glut in the market, and so it'll be interesting to see how that comes out. They did not, the marketing firm didn't have any economists working for them. I actually met with them and asked them, are you estimating demand? No one was. They think that the apples will take away from other food categories. And it will be available in grocery stores this fall. I'm not sure on if that will be internationally or nationally, but it'll be interesting to see. So thank you, and sorry I went over a little bit.